My name's Kimberly, and here's my story. I grew up in a small town and attended the local high school where I first met Jason. He was tall, charming, and always seemed to be the center of attention. We were just teenagers, but it felt like love hit me instantly. We started dating, and soon enough we couldn't bear to be apart. We got married at the age of 20. Looking back, we were young and naive, but back then it felt like living in a fairy tale. Jason was always the fun-loving, carefree type. He had big dreams and a bigger personality. I was more grounded, focused on building a stable future. We balanced each other out, or so I thought. Not long after we got married, I found out I was pregnant with our daughter, Lily. It was a surprise, but a welcome one. Jason was over the moon, and for a while it felt like we were on top of the world. We were this young couple excited about starting a family and building a life together. But as time went on, cracks started to show. Jason's carefree attitude started to feel more like irresponsibility. He was always chasing the next big thing, never satisfied with what he had. Meanwhile, I was working hard, trying to keep everything together for Lily's sake. I could see he loved her, but he was more interested in his own adventures than in being a responsible father. One evening, after putting Lily to bed, I sat down with Jason in the living room. I needed to talk to him about his spending habits and lack of focus. It was a conversation I had been dreading, but it had to be done. "Jason, we need to talk," I started, trying to keep my voice calm. "What's up, Kim?" he asked, not taking his eyes off the TV. "I'm worried about how we're handling things," I said. "We need to be more responsible, especially with Lily in the picture now." Jason shook his head. "You're always worrying about the future. Why can't we just enjoy the present?" "Because the present is a mess, Jason," I shouted back. "We're barely making ends meet, and you're out there buying new gadgets and talking about trips we can't afford." A few weeks later, after another argument about his latest impulse buy, I made the decision to end our marriage. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was the right thing for Lily and me. I wanted her to have a stable, predictable life, not one filled with uncertainty and broken promises. The next few weeks were tough. Jason moved out, and I started the process of filing for divorce. He wasn't happy about it, but he eventually agreed to joint custody and to pay child support. It wasn't easy, but I felt a sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Raising Lily on my own was challenging, but it was also rewarding. She was my world, and I was determined to give her the best life possible. I found a job that allowed me to provide for us, and slowly, we settled into our new routine. Over time, Jason and I found a way to be civil with each other. He would visit Lily occasionally, and he always made sure to send the child support on time. For that, I was grateful. It wasn't the life I had imagined when we first got married, but it was a life that worked for us. Lily had just turned 18, and we were celebrating her acceptance into law school. It was a big deal for both of us. She'd worked so hard, and I was incredibly proud. I decided to have a special dinner to mark the occasion, and for the first time in a long while, I invited Jason, her father, to join us. When I called him, he sounded genuinely pleased to be invited. "Hey, Jason, it's Kimberly. I'm planning a dinner for Lily. She got into law school, and I thought it would be nice if you came," I said, trying to keep it casual. "Kimberly, that's great news. I'll be there," he said, and we hung up. The night of the dinner, I was a bundle of nerves. I wanted everything to be perfect for Lily. I prepared her favorite dishes and set the table nicely. When Jason arrived, he looked surprisingly good, dressed in a crisp shirt and slacks, carrying a small gift. Lily came down the stairs, beaming when she saw her dad. "Dad, you made it." "Of course I wouldn't miss it for the world," Jason said, hugging her tightly. "And I brought you a little something." Lily tore open the wrapping to find a brand new smartphone. "Wow, Dad, this is amazing." "Thank you," she exclaimed, her face lighting up. We sat down to dinner, and the conversation flowed easily. Jason talked about his new job and his big house. He seemed to be doing well, and I was glad for Lily's sake. "So, Kimberly, you haven't changed a bit," Jason said, looking at me across the table. I smiled awkwardly. "Thanks, Jason. You seem to be doing well." "Yeah, things are good. Got a great job, nice house. Life's treating me well," he replied, clearly proud of himself. After dinner, Lily announced she was going out to celebrate with her friends. "Thanks for the dinner, Mom and Dad. The phone is awesome. I'll see you both later," she said, giving us both hugs before dashing out the door. Jason and I were left alone, the house suddenly feeling very quiet. I started clearing the table, and he stood up to help. We worked in silence for a while, the familiar routine of washing and drying dishes bringing back memories of our life together. After a while, Jason broke the silence. "Sure, here's your story, punctuated and divided into short paragraphs with each sentence starting on a new line. My name is Kimberly, and this is my story. I grew up in a small town, went to the local high school, and that's where I met Jason. He was this tall, charming guy, always the center of attention. We were both just teenagers, but it felt like love at first sight. We started dating, and before we knew it, we were inseparable. We got married when we were just 20. Looking back, we were too young and naive, but at the time it seemed like the perfect fairy tale. Jason was always the fun-loving, carefree type. He had big dreams and a bigger personality. I was more grounded, focused on building a stable future. We balanced each other out, or so I thought. Not long after we got married, I found out I was pregnant with our daughter Lily. It was a surprise, but a welcome one. Jason was over the moon, and for a while it felt like we were on top of the world. We were this young couple excited about starting a family and building a life together. But as time went on, cracks started to show. Jason's carefree attitude started to feel more like irresponsibility. He was always chasing the next big thing, never satisfied with what he had. Meanwhile, I was working hard, trying to keep everything together for Lily's sake. I could see he loved her, but he was more interested in his own adventures than in being a responsible father. One evening, after putting Lily to bed, I sat down with Jason in the living room. I needed to talk to him about his spending habits and lack of focus. It was a conversation I had been dreading, but it had to be done. "Jason, we need to talk," I started, trying to keep my voice calm. "What's up, Kim?" he asked, not taking his eyes off the TV. "I'm worried about how we're handling things," I said. "We need to be more responsible, especially with Lily in the picture now." Jason shook his head. "You're always worrying about the future. Why can't we just enjoy the present?" "Because the present is a mess, Jason," I shouted back. "We're barely making ends meet, and you're out there buying new gadgets and talking about trips we can't afford." A few weeks later, after another argument about his latest impulse buy, I made the decision to end our marriage. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was the right thing for Lily and me. I wanted her to have a stable, predictable life, not one filled with uncertainty and broken promises. The next few weeks were tough. Jason moved out, and I started the process of filing for divorce. He wasn't happy about it, but he eventually agreed to joint custody and to pay child support. It wasn't the life I had imagined when we first got married, but it was a life that worked for us. Lily had just turned 18, and we were celebrating her acceptance into law school. It was a big deal for both of us. She'd worked so hard, and I was incredibly proud. I decided to have a special dinner to mark the occasion. For the first time in a long while, I invited Jason, her father, to join us. "Hey, Jason, it's Kimberly. I'm planning a dinner for Lily. She got into law school, and I thought it would be nice if you came," I said, trying to keep it casual. "Kimberly, that's great news. I'll be there," he said. The night of the dinner, I was a bundle of nerves. I wanted everything to be perfect for Lily. I prepared her favorite dishes and set the table nicely. When Jason arrived, he looked surprisingly good, dressed in a crisp shirt and slacks, carrying a small gift. Lily came downstairs beaming when she saw her dad. "Dad, you made it," she exclaimed. "Of course. I wouldn't miss it for the world," Jason said, hugging her tightly. "And I brought you a little something." Lily tore open the wrapping to find a brand new smartphone. "Wow, Dad, this is amazing. Thank you," she exclaimed, her face lighting up. We sat down to dinner, and the conversation flowed easily. Jason talked about his new job and his big house. He seemed to be doing well, and I was glad for Lily's sake. "So, Kimberly, you haven't changed a bit," Jason said, looking at me across the table. I smiled awkwardly. "Thanks, Jason. You seem to be doing well." "Yeah, things are good. Got a great job. Nice house. Life's treating me well," he replied, clearly proud of himself. After dinner, Lily announced she was going out to celebrate with her friends. "Thanks for the dinner, Mom and Dad. The phone is awesome. I'll see you both later," she said, giving us both hugs before dashing out the door. Jason and I were left alone, the house suddenly feeling very quiet. I started clearing the table, and he stood up to help. We worked in silence for a while, the familiar routine of washing and drying dishes, bringing back memories of our life together. After a while, Jason broke the silence. "Kimberly, I've been doing a lot of thinking lately," he said, his tone serious. "What about?" I asked, focused on the dishes in front of me. "About us. About Lily. About everything," he replied, gently placing the dish he had been drying on the counter. "I miss what we had. I miss you. I want us to give it another shot," he continued, his voice sincere. I hesitated, memories and uncertainties swirling in my mind. "Jason, we've been through a lot together, not all of it good. Why now?" "Because I've realized what I lost. I want to be a better man for you, for Lily," he said. I took a deep breath. "All right, Jason, let's take it slow. See where it goes." A smile spread across his face. "Thank you, Kimberly. You won't regret this." We finished the dishes in a comfortable silence, both of us lost in our thoughts. It felt strange, but also a little exciting, the possibility of starting over. As the night went on, we talked more, sharing stories and laughing about old times. Getting back with Jason was a big decision, but I decided to give it a try. We got married again, just a simple ceremony at the city hall. Only Lily and Jason's older sister, Margaret, were there. It was a small, quiet event, nothing fancy. I hoped this time things would be different. Moving into Jason's big house felt strange at first. It was so different from my small, cozy place. The house was huge, with lots of rooms and big windows. Jason seemed happy to have me there, and for a while, things felt good. I started decorating, trying to make the place feel like home. Lily came home for a visit a few days later. She was thrilled to see us together again. We sat in the living room, catching up on her life at college. "So, how's law school treating you?" Jason asked, looking proud. "It's tough, but I love it. I'm learning so much," Lily replied, her eyes shining with excitement. "I'm glad to hear that, kiddo. You're going to be a great lawyer," Jason said, patting her shoulder. "Thanks, Dad. It's good to see you both together again," Lily said, looking at us with a smile. After Lily left, Jason and I sat on the couch, talking about our plans. We talked about traveling, maybe taking a trip to the mountains. It felt good to plan things together again. But as time went on, I noticed Jason wasn't putting money into our joint account. I asked him about it one night while we were having dinner. "Jason, I've noticed you haven't been putting money into our account. What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my tone calm. He looked up from his plate, looking a bit annoyed. "I've had some money problems, Kimberly. I'm working on it." "Money problems? You didn't mention anything about that before. What's going on?" I pressed, feeling a bit uneasy. "I didn't want to worry you. It's nothing big, just a few things I need to sort out," he said, looking away. As the months went by, I noticed Jason buying new gadgets, fancy clothes, and more car rentals. I tried talking to him about it, but he always brushed me off, saying he had it under control. For 2 years, I tried to talk to Jason about saving money and managing our budget better. Every time I brought it up, he brushed me off, saying he had everything under control. But he didn't. Our bank account was always running low, and he kept buying new gadgets and renting flashy cars. He posted videos of himself with these expensive toys on social media, making everyone think we were living the high life. Friends would comment on how lucky I was, but they had no idea how hard it was to keep everything together. Jason's spending was getting out of hand, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. Our joint account was barely enough to cover bills, and he was flaunting new gadgets and expensive clothes. I decided to confront him seriously this time. "Jason, we need to talk," I said, walking into the living room where he was lounging with his tablet. "Can't it wait, Kimberly? I'm in the middle of something," he replied, not looking up. "No, it can't wait. This is important," I said, my voice firm. "I found another receipt for a luxury car rental. We can't keep doing this, Jason. We're running out of money. We're barely getting by, and you're spending like we're millionaires." "I work hard, Kimberly. I deserve to treat myself," he said, looking annoyed. "Treating yourself is one thing, but this is out of control. We're drowning here," I replied, feeling my frustration rise. "Stop exaggerating. We're fine. I've got it covered," he said, dismissing my concerns. "No, Jason, you don't. You're acting like a spoiled kid, not a responsible adult," I snapped. My patience wearing thin, he got up, glaring at me. "I don't need a lecture from you, Kimberly. I know what I'm doing," he stormed out of the room, leaving me standing there, shaking with anger. I couldn't keep doing this. Something had to change. I kept hoping Jason would change, that he'd finally see reason and start acting more responsibly. But it only got worse. Each month I'd find more receipts for gadgets and rentals. I felt like I was drowning, trying to make ends meet while he spent money like it was going out of style. It was like he hadn't changed at all since our first breakup. The man I hoped had grown up was still the same carefree guy who didn't think about tomorrow. One day I got a call from my brother. Our mother had died. She lived in the same city where Lily was studying. The news hit me hard. I told Jason, and we decided to take the train to say goodbye. It was a long, silent journey. I was lost in my thoughts, trying to process the loss. When we arrived, Lily was there to meet us, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. We hugged tightly, finding some comfort in being together. The farewell was modest, just close family. My brother and I did what needed to be done without any fuss or luxury. It was what Mom would have wanted. During the service, I looked around and realized Jason wasn't there. I felt a pang of worry and turned to Lily. "Have you seen your father?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She shook her head, looking just as confused. "No, Mom, I haven't seen him since we got here." I felt a knot in my stomach, a mix of worry and frustration. This was typical of Jason, disappearing when I needed him most. But I pushed those feelings aside, focusing on saying goodbye to my mother. Jason came up to me only after the ceremony was over. I was very tired, so I didn't ask him where he had been all this time. After the funeral, we gathered at my mother's house for the will reading. It was just me, my brother Tom, Lily, Jason, and a few close relatives. The lawyer, Mr. Harris, a longtime family friend, opened the envelope and pulled out a few sheets of paper. To my daughter Kimberly, I leave the house and all its contents, Mr. Harris read aloud. To my son Tom, I leave my savings and any remaining assets. I felt a lump in my throat. The house was a big responsibility, but I was grateful. It was full of memories, a place where I could still feel my mother's presence. I looked over at Tom, who was nodding, seemingly okay with the arrangement. Suddenly, Jason, who had been silent until now, stood up. We need to sell the house. It's too much for Kimberly to handle on her own, he said, his tone more demanding than concerned. Jason, what are you talking about? We just heard the will. The house is mine, I said firmly. Exactly. It's your house, so we should sell it and split the money, Jason insisted, his face flushed with frustration. No way, Dad, Lily interjected, her voice firm. I lived here with Grandma while I was in college. I plan to keep living here. Jason waved her off. Lily, this is between the adults. Kimberly, we need to be practical about this. Practical? You're talking about selling my mother's house like it's just another asset, I said, feeling my anger rising. It is an asset, Kimberly, and as your husband, I have a say in what happens with it. Jason shot back, crossing his arms. Lily stood up, glaring at her father. Dad, I'm studying law, remember? Inherited property isn't shared between spouses. You don't get a say in this. Jason's face turned red with anger. Don't talk to me like that, young lady. This is a family decision, and I'm part of this family. Then he turned to me. If you don't sell the house, I'll divorce you. The room fell silent. All eyes were on us. I could see the shock and confusion on my relatives' faces. I took a step back, feeling a mix of anger and betrayal. Fine, Jason. We'll talk about it when we get home, I said, my voice cold and steady. We left early the next morning, taking the train back home. Jason was quiet the whole way, his anger simmering just below the surface. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through social media to distract myself. That's when I saw it, a video Jason had posted. In the video, he was standing in front of a lavish funeral setup, talking about how close he was to my mother and how much he was suffering. The comments were filled with sympathy, and the video had over 1 million views. I felt a wave of anger and disbelief. He wasn't at my mother's funeral because he was at another funeral across the cemetery filming himself against the background of the coffin of a rich businessman. I couldn't believe how hypocritical and deceitful he was. Without looking up, I said, Jason, you're in for a surprise when we get home. He looked at me, a smug smile on his face. So you've decided to sell. Good, we'll make a nice chunk of change. I'm thinking of getting a new car with the money. I just shook my head sadly, not saying another word. The train ride felt endless, my mind racing with anger and disappointment. When we got back to Jason's house, there was a surprise waiting for him, his older sister Margaret sitting at the dining table. I had called her in advance and asked her to come over for this conversation. The moment Jason saw her, he froze, his confident demeanor vanished. Margaret, what are you doing here? Jason asked, his voice trembling a bit. Margaret looked at him sternly. I'm here because Kimberly called me. We need to have a serious talk, Jason. Sit down. Jason hesitated, then slowly walked over and sat down across from her, looking nervous. I could see the fear in his eyes. I took a deep breath, ready to lay everything out on the table. Margaret, I need to tell you what's been going on. I began, my voice steady. Jason has been spending excessively on gadgets and car rentals. He's been demanding that I sell my mother's house and even threatened me with divorce if I didn't agree. Margaret's eyes narrowed as she turned to Jason. Is this true, Jason? Jason looked down, not meeting her gaze. It's not as bad as she's making it sound, Margaret. Not as bad, I snapped. You've been wasting money left and right and trying to bully me into selling my mother's house. That's pretty bad, Jason. Margaret shook her head, disappointment etched on her face. Jason, you haven't grown up at all. You're still acting like a child. You've never achieved anything on your own. Jason looked up, a mix of anger and shame on his face. That's not fair, Margaret. I tried my best. Your best? Margaret scoffed. The house you're living in isn't even yours, it's mine. I let you live here because I felt sorry for you, and now I find out you've been wasting money and bullying Kimberly. Jason's face turned pale. Margaret, I didn't mean for things to get out of hand, Jason pleaded. Out of hand, Margaret repeated, her voice cold. You've been living off my generosity and trying to push Kimberly around, and do you know what else? I've been paying Lily's child support, not you. You couldn't even be bothered to take care of your own daughter. You should be grateful to God for having a wife like Kimberly. You don't deserve her. I felt tears welling up in my eyes at Margaret's words. I turned to Jason, my voice trembling with emotion. Jason, the house should go to Lily. She's an adult now, and it's her legacy. Jason suddenly jumped up, his face red with anger. I don't give a damn about Lily. I want half the money from the sale of that house, or else I want a divorce. The room fell silent. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I took a deep breath. Fine, Jason, I said, trying to keep my composure. You don't care about your own daughter. Fine, Jason. I reached into my bag and pulled out the divorce papers I had prepared earlier. I handed them to him, my hand shaking. Here are the divorce papers. Sign them. Jason's hands trembled as he reluctantly signed the papers. You're making a big mistake, Kimberly. No, Jason. The mistake was thinking you'd ever change, I said, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me. Jason finished signing and then bolted out of the house, slamming the door behind him. I stood there, feeling a mix of exhaustion and liberation. Margaret walked over to me, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. Kimberly, thank you for everything you've done for my brother. And you've got Lily. You'll get through this. After the divorce, I packed up and moved back to the city where I grew up. It felt good to be back in my mother's house, surrounded by familiar memories. The house needed some work, but it was home. It was a place where I could start fresh. Lily graduated from college not long after. She married a wonderful guy, and now she's expecting a baby. I'm excited to become a grandmother. Life was starting to feel settled and peaceful, something I hadn't felt in a long time. One afternoon, I was in the garden pulling weeds when my phone rang. I wiped my hands on my jeans and answered it, seeing Jason's name on the screen. Hello, I said, already feeling a knot in my stomach. Kimberly, it's Jason. I need to talk to you, he said, his voice sounding desperate. What do you want, Jason? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm in big trouble, Kimberly. I've got debts piling up and I need your help, he blurted out. No, Jason, I'm not giving you any money, I said firmly. But Kimberly, I need you. We could try again, you know. Make things right this time, he said, his voice almost begging. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You want to get married again. Are you out of your mind? Come on, Kimberly. We had good times too. We can start over, he said, trying to sound convincing. Jason, we're done. I've moved on and you need to do the same. I'm not marrying you again, and I'm definitely not giving you money, I said, feeling my anger rise. He sighed heavily on the other end of the line. I thought you'd understand. I thought you'd want to help me. I've helped you enough, Jason. It's time you stand on your own 2 feet, I replied, my voice cold. Fine, Kimberly. I see how it is, he said, his voice turning bitter. Goodbye, Jason, I said, and hung up the phone. I paused, a rush of emotions washing over me, relief mingled with a touch of sadness. That chapter of my life was finally closed, once and for all. Jason's struggles were no longer mine to carry, and I felt a burden lift from my shoulders. Returning to my gardening, a sense of calm settled within me deeper than I've felt in years. Now I could turn my attention to the future, my daughter, and the excitement of a new grandchild on the horizon. I was done looking back. It was time to embrace the life ahead of me with all its possibilities.
I stood there, motionless, as Nathan tore the tickets to my art show right in front of my eyes. His words echoed in the small, cluttered living room of our modest home. "Nobody's going to buy your drawings, Emily. If you have time for this, get a real job." I felt a lump in my throat, the sting of tears in my eyes. But I swallowed hard, refusing to let them fall. I had dreamt of becoming an illustrator since I was a child, and after years of juggling motherhood and freelance work, I had finally managed to organize my own exhibition. Yet, here I was, watching my dream being literally ripped apart. Nathan's disdain for my work was not new. Ever since we moved in with his parents, my passion for art had become a point of contention. His parents, who never worked a day since their retirement, spent their days criticizing my cooking and scoffing at my illustrations. "You're not a painter. How can drawings make money?" they would sneer. No matter how often I explained that my art was not just a hobby, but a source of income, they refused to understand. I looked at the torn pieces of the ticket on the floor and felt a surge of determination. This was not just about my art. It was about my identity, my dreams, and my worth. I had always supported Nathan in his interests, never once belittling his weekend golf sessions with friends, even though they brought in no income. Why couldn't he extend the same courtesy to me? As Nathan turned away, dismissing the entire incident, I made a silent vow. I would no longer seek his approval. My work had value, and I would prove it to him and everyone else who doubted me. Picking up the torn pieces, I met Nathan's indifferent gaze with newfound resolve. "I am not just your wife or Sophie's mother," I said calmly, yet firmly. "I am an illustrator, and I will make my exhibition a success, with or without your support." Nathan scoffed, but I saw a flicker of surprise in his eyes. For the first time I had stood up to him. It was the beginning of a new chapter for me, one where I would no longer let his or anyone else's negativity dictate my life. That night, after putting Sophie to bed and ensuring the house was in order, I sat at my desk and began to sketch. The lines flowed from my pen, fueled by a mix of anger, hurt, and a burning desire to succeed. Each stroke was a step towards my independence, a declaration of my worth. This exhibition would be my moment, the turning point where I would finally emerge from the shadows of doubt and disrespect. As I worked into the early hours of the morning, a sense of empowerment enveloped me. I was more than just a part of this family. I was an individual with dreams and capabilities, and I was ready to fight for them. "Another day of scribbling away, Emily?" Nathan's mother, Mrs. Clark, sneered as I prepared breakfast. Her words, laced with sarcasm, were a daily ritual as ingrained in our routine as the morning coffee. "Yes, Mrs. Clark, just like any other day," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I had learned that responding with emotion only fueled their taunts. Nathan sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, oblivious to the tension. His father, Mr. Clark, joined in. "Why bother with all this art nonsense? Real work brings in real money, not these childish drawings." I served breakfast, forcing a smile. "Art is my work, Mr. Clark, and it does pay," I said, more to myself than to them. Their laughter followed me as I retreated to my makeshift studio, a corner in our bedroom. Their words were like barbs, each one a reminder of how little they valued my passion. But I couldn't let them see how much it hurt. I had Sophie to think about, and my art. As I settled into my work, the door burst open. Nathan stood there, his face contorted with anger. "I got a call from Sophie's school. She's falling behind in her studies. What are you doing all day, Emily?" I looked up, surprised by his outburst. "I take care of Sophie, the house, and then I work." "You know my schedule, Nathan." He stepped closer, his voice rising. "You call this work? This is why Sophie is struggling. You're too busy playing artist." His words stung. I had always balanced my responsibilities, ensuring Sophie's needs were met. "I make sure she does her homework, Nathan. I can't do it for her. Maybe if you spent less time on these stupid drawings and more time being a mother. His words trailed off as he stormed out, leaving a heavy silence in their wake. I sat there, stunned. The accusations were unfair and hurtful. I wasn't just an artist. I was a full-time mother, a housekeeper, and a wife. Yet none of that seemed to matter to Nathan or his parents. That evening, as I tucked Sophie into bed, her innocent voice broke through my turmoil. "Mommy, why does Daddy yell about your drawings? I like them. They're pretty." I kissed her forehead, a lump forming in my throat. "Thank you, sweetie. Daddy just doesn't understand, but that's okay. What matters is that we understand each other, right?" Sophie nodded, her eyes filled with a trust and love that warmed my heart. It was in that moment, looking at my daughter's innocent face, that I realized I had to make a change. I couldn't let Nathan's ignorance and his parents' disdain shape our lives any longer. I had to stand up for myself and for Sophie. The next morning, I made a decision. I would go through with the exhibition, no matter what they said. I would show them that my art was not just a hobby, but my lifeline, my expression, and my contribution to the world. And maybe, just maybe, I would find a way out of this suffocating environment for Sophie and myself. The day I received the invitation for the solo exhibition was a ray of light in my otherwise dreary routine. I remember staring at the email on my laptop, my heart pounding with excitement and disbelief. This was it, my chance to shine, to prove my worth beyond the confines of these judgmental walls. However, my elation was short-lived. As I shared the news at dinner, hoping for a sliver of support, the reaction was anything but encouraging. A solo exhibition? Who would be interested in that? Nathan scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain. His parents chimed in with their own barbs. "Don't get your hopes up, dear. These things are often more about who you know than actual talent," Mrs. Clark said, her words sharp as knives. I clenched my jaw, fighting back the hurt. "It's a big opportunity for me. People do appreciate my work," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Nathan laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Appreciate? Emily, let's be realistic. You're a stay-at-home mom who doodles. This isn't a career, it's a pastime at best." The dinner table became my battlefield, each word from Nathan a bullet I dodged or absorbed. I excused myself early, retreating to my studio corner with a heavy heart. Their words echoed in my mind, but I couldn't let them win. Not this time. I worked tirelessly for weeks, often staying up late to complete my pieces for the exhibition. Each brushstroke was a silent rebellion against Nathan's cruel words, a testament to my dedication and talent. One evening, as I put the finishing touches on a painting, Nathan barged into the room. "Are you still up doing this? You're neglecting your duties, Emily. The house is a mess, and Sophie's been watching TV for hours." I stood up, my patience finally wearing thin. "My art is important, Nathan. It's not just a duty I can neglect, and I've taken care of everything else. Can't you see I'm trying to build something for myself here?" He snorted. "Build what? A fantasy? You think these paintings will change our lives? Grow up, Emily. You're living in a dream world." I looked at him, the man I had married, now a stranger fueled by contempt. "Maybe I am in a dream world, Nathan, but it's better than living in a world where I'm not respected or valued. I will go ahead with this exhibition, with or without your support." Turning my back to him, I continued my work, each brushstroke a declaration of my independence, a step away from his demeaning grasp. As the days passed, my resolve only strengthened. The exhibition was not just about showcasing my art, it was about reclaiming my self-worth and dignity. It was about showing Sophie that dreams are worth fighting for, no matter the opposition. And so, with a mix of fear and excitement, I prepared for the exhibition day, ready to step into the light, leaving the shadows of doubt and disrespect far behind. The day of the exhibition neared, and a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I knew it was more than just about displaying my art. It was a statement, a challenge against the disdainful environment I had been living in. One evening, as we sat in the dimly lit living room, I mustered the courage to invite Nathan. "The exhibition is next week," I began hesitantly. "I was wondering if you'd like to come." He didn't look up from the TV. "Can't. Got plans with the guys." I felt a familiar sting, but persisted. "It's important to me, Nathan. I've put a lot of effort into this." Finally, he turned, his eyes cold. "Why do you keep going on about this, Emily? It's just a little show. It's not like it's going to change anything." I held the invitation out to him, a futile gesture of hope. It's not just a little show to me. It's my work, my passion. With a swift, careless motion, Nathan grabbed the invitation and tore it in half. "This is what I think of your little hobby," he sneered. The pieces fluttered to the ground, a symbol of my shattered efforts. I stood there, frozen, as he turned back to his show, dismissing my dreams as if they were nothing. Tears blurred my vision as I picked up the remnants of the invitation. His words echoed in my ears, a cruel reminder of the lack of respect I had been enduring. But amidst the hurt and humiliation, a fierce determination took root within me. I was done seeking validation from a man who couldn't see beyond his own ego. I glanced at Sophie, who had witnessed the whole scene from the doorway. Her eyes were wide, filled with confusion and sadness. At that moment, I knew I had to set an example for her. I couldn't let her grow up thinking it was acceptable for her dreams to be trampled upon like this. The next morning, I made a decision. I would leave Nathan, not immediately, but soon. I would plan it carefully, for Sophie's sake and mine. This exhibition would be my stepping stone, a way to prove to myself that I could stand on my own. The days leading up to the exhibition were a blur of preparation and quiet planning. I was a woman on a mission, no longer the timid, acquiescent wife and daughter-in-law. I reached out to friends, seeking support and advice. I opened a separate bank account, a small but significant step towards financial independence. On the day of the exhibition, as I stood among my paintings, surrounded by appreciative onlookers, I felt a sense of accomplishment like never before. My art was being seen, appreciated. It was a validation that Nathan and his parents could never understand. As people inquired about my work, expressing interest and admiration, I felt my confidence soar. Each compliment, each interested glance at my paintings was a vindication of my talent and hard work. I sold my first piece that day, a moment that marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life. A chapter where I was no longer just Nathan's wife or Mrs. Clark's daughter-in-law, but Emily, the artist, a woman who had the courage to stand up for herself and her dreams. The success of the exhibition was the turning point. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I knew I couldn't go back to the life I had been living. The disdain and disrespect were suffocating, and for the first time I saw a way out. I waited until Nathan left for work and Sophie was at school. With a heavy heart but a clear mind, I packed a small suitcase with essentials. I took a deep breath as I looked around the room, a mix of relief and sorrow washing over me. This was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I left a note on the kitchen table, not wanting to confront Nathan or his parents directly. I knew they wouldn't understand, nor did I expect them to. The note was brief. I need some time and space. Sophie and I will be staying with my parents for a while. I picked Sophie up from school that day, her smile a balm to my anxious heart. "We're going on a little trip to Grandma and Grandpa's," I told her. She was excited, unaware of the weight of our journey. At my parents' house, I finally felt a sense of peace. They welcomed us with open arms, no questions asked. They saw the tiredness in my eyes and the determination in my posture. "You always have a home here, Emily," my mother said, hugging me tightly. In the safety of my childhood home, I explained to Sophie why we were there. "Mommy needs some time to work on her paintings, and we need a little break from Daddy," I said gently. Sophie, wise beyond her years, looked up at me with her big eyes. "Is it because Daddy doesn't like your drawings?" Her question stung, but I nodded. "Sometimes people don't understand the things we love, sweetheart, but that doesn't mean we should stop loving them." The days turned into weeks. I spent my time working on new illustrations and planning our future. The quiet and support of my parents' home were a stark contrast to the constant criticism I had faced in Nathan's house. One afternoon, I received a call from Nathan. His voice was a mix of anger and disbelief. "Where are you? Why aren't you home? You can't just take Sophie and leave." His words were like daggers, but I stood my ground. "Sophie and I are safe. We're with my parents. I needed space, Nathan. Space you never gave me." "You're being selfish, Emily. You're tearing this family apart over some paintings." I clenched the phone tightly, my resolve hardening. "No, Nathan. You tore this family apart with your disrespect and disdain for what I love. I won't apologize for wanting to be happy, for wanting Sophie to see her mother happy." There was silence on the other end, and then a click. He had hung up. But it didn't matter. I had spoken my truth, something I had been afraid to do for so long. In those weeks at my parents' house, I began to see a future for Sophie and myself, a future where we were free to be who we wanted to be, free from judgment and belittlement. It was a future I was determined to make a reality. The weeks following my departure were a whirlwind. I immersed myself in my work, finding solace in the strokes of my brush. My parents' encouragement was a stark contrast to the environment I had left behind. They believed in me, and that belief was a powerful motivator. My phone buzzed one evening with a call from Nathan. Bracing myself, I answered. His voice was different this time, laced with desperation. "Emily, please come back. The house is a mess, and I can't handle everything on my own." His plea was a strange mix of pitiful and infuriating. "You're calling me back to clean up your mess?" I asked, my voice steady. "It's not just that. Sophie misses her home, doesn't she?" "You're being selfish, keeping her away," he replied, trying to guilt-trip me. I sighed, feeling a surge of pity for the man I once loved. "Sophie is doing fine. She's happy and well cared for. This isn't about her, Nathan. This is about you, not being able to handle the responsibilities you so easily dismissed when I was there." Nathan was silent for a moment. I need you, Emily." "I needed you too. Nathan, I needed your support and respect, but you chose to belittle my dreams and ambitions. I can't come back to that," I said, my voice firm. The call ended with Nathan's empty pleas echoing in my ears. It was clear he had not changed. His request was not for reconciliation, but for convenience. Meanwhile, my art started gaining traction. I received more commissions and even had inquiries from galleries interested in showcasing my work. It was exhilarating and validating. My hard work was paying off, not just in terms of recognition, but also financially. One day, as I was working on a new piece, Sophie came to me with a drawing. "Look, Mommy, I made this for you." Her drawing, a colorful depiction of us holding hands, was a stark reminder of why I had made the decision to leave. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Just like you," I told her, hugging her tightly. My success was a bittersweet reminder of the life I had left behind. Nathan's calls became more infrequent, each one more desperate than the last. He was struggling to manage without me, and while part of me felt vindicated, another part felt sorry for him. But I had made my choice, for Sophie and for myself. I was building a new life, one where my art was not just a hobby, but my identity. A life where I was respected and valued. As the invitations to exhibitions and galleries came in, I realized that this was just the beginning. I had stepped out of Nathan's shadow and into my own light. As my reputation as an artist grew, so did the attention I received. It wasn't long before a local newspaper expressed interest in my story. The idea of sharing my journey was both exhilarating and intimidating, but I knew it was an opportunity I couldn't pass up. The day of the interview, I sat in my parents' cozy living room, the reporter's recorder blinking on the coffee table. "Tell us, Emily, what inspired you to pursue art so passionately?" he asked, his pen poised over his notepad. I took a deep breath, collecting my thoughts. Art has always been a part of who I am, but the real push came from needing to prove to myself, and perhaps to others, that my passion was more than just a hobby. It was my voice, my identity. The reporter nodded, scribbling down notes. "And how has your family reacted to your success?" The question was a loaded one. I chose my words carefully. "Let's just say not everyone understood my journey. But I believe in following your dreams, even if it means walking that path alone." The article came out a few days later. "Local artist finds success against all odds," the headline read. It painted me as a sort of underdog hero, a narrative I hadn't expected but appreciated. The response was overwhelming, with people reaching out to express their support and admiration. Among the flurry of positive attention, Nathan's reaction was conspicuously absent. That is, until one day he showed up at my parents' doorstep, unannounced and uninvited. I opened the door to find him standing there, a mix of anger and desperation in his eyes. "You're making a spectacle of our family with these stories," he accused, waving a copy of the newspaper in his hand. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. "I shared my story, Nathan. A story of finding my own path. I didn't mention you or anyone else." He scoffed. "But it's obvious, isn't it? You're making me out to be the bad guy." "Am I? Or did you do that all by yourself?" I countered, my patience wearing thin. Nathan's face reddened. I want you and Sophie back. You belong with me, with your family. I shook my head, a sense of finality settling over me. No, Nathan, Sophie and I are doing just fine. We're happy and we're free. Free from the negativity and disrespect we faced with you. He looked like he wanted to say more, but I held up my hand. This is my life now, Nathan. I suggest you find a way to move on with yours. As he stormed off, I felt a sense of closure. I had stood up to him, not with anger, but with the quiet strength of someone who knows their worth. In the weeks that followed, my art continued to flourish. Exhibitions, commissions, and collaborations, my calendar was full. Sophie thrived too, her laughter and creativity a constant source of joy. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. A future I had carved out for myself and my daughter, on our terms.